I see you, I appreciate you, and I'm thankful you subscribed and keep showing up. This space is built on your insights. Leave your thoughts and lessons below. Now, cue the tension, cue the truth. Let's get into it. Before you let someone vote on your place in their life, pay attention to how they speak about you when they think you will swallow it. Public disrespect is not a communication style. It is a boundary test. In this story, my wife did not just insult me. She recruited an audience, so I would feel outnumbered and small. If you ever hear a partner say, "We decided about your future," stop and ask, who is we? And why do they get a seat at your marriage? That question can save you years. Before we get into it, if you have ever been publicly disrespected by someone who was supposed to love you, I want you to listen closely to what happens next. And I need you to tell me this in the comments right now. The moment a partner says we decided, do you stay and fight or do you walk? If you're locked in already, like this story, share it with someone who needs a reminder and subscribe for more real, emotionally honest relationship dramas like this. The first time I noticed a shift, it was something stupid. The way Maribel started flinching at the smell of sawdust on my jacket. Not coughing, flinching like the scent offended her. I restore old furniture for a living, the kind that comes in chipped and forgotten and leaves my shop with its dignity back. My hands always carry a trace of oak and citrus oil. She used to call it home. That winter in St. Louis, she opened the car window and said carefully, "Could you change before we go anywhere?" Maribel was 36 and brilliant at making rooms feel expensive. She could fold a napkin and make it look like a plan. She worked in brand strategy for a regional health and wellness company that paid her to sound certain. She spoke in clean sentences, no extra words, like she was trimming fat from a pitch deck. I admired that about her. I also feared it sometimes. When she got quiet, it was never because she had nothing to say. It was because she was deciding which version of the truth would hurt the least. I was 38, and my shop sat behind a tire place on Natural Bridge Road. 2 bays with a rattling door and a heater that clanked like it was arguing with winter. I kept a jar of peppermint candies on the counter because older customers liked them, and because my father always carried peppermints in his coat pocket at church. On Fridays, I swept until the concrete showed, then went home to our brick two-story in a neighborhood with dog walkers and porch swings and more for sale signs than people admitted. Our marriage started in Kansas City 10 years earlier with a cheap apartment and the kind of love that makes you laugh at the same thing for no reason. We had a tradition: Sunday mornings, pancakes, and old records. She danced barefoot in the kitchen while I flipped batter, and she would touch my wrist like she needed to prove I was real. Back then, she liked my quiet. She said it made her feel safe. Later, she called that same quiet a lack of ambition, as if calm was a character flaw. The friends came into focus after Maribel got promoted and started traveling to Dallas and Nashville for campaigns. She returned with sleek little habits. Sparkling water only, oat milk only, no more clutter. She also returned with Cameron, Selah, and Noelle, women she called her reset circle. They were all black women like us, all successful, all sharp in a way that made me sit up straighter. Their compliments felt like appraisals. They talked about energy, alignment, optics. They spoke about marriages the way people talk about investments. The first time I met them, Cameron walked through our living room and looked at the family photos like she was inspecting merchandise. She stopped at the picture of me in my shop apron, holding an antique chair with a missing leg. "He makes furniture?" she asked Maribel, not me. Maribel laughed too brightly. "He restores. It's artisanal." I should have corrected her right then, told Cameron my work was not a novelty, but I smiled and offered everyone ginger tea because I was raised a host, even when you feel like a guest in your own home. Decision point number 1 came on a snowy Tuesday when Maribel texted me at 3:11 p.m., "Dinner with the girls Friday. Dress nice. Rooftop." I stared at the message while a client in my shop explained how her grandmother's dresser had survived a flood. My hands were full of walnut stains, and my phone screen reflected my tired face back at me. Rooftop in February meant heated lamps and expensive small plates. I wanted to say no. I wanted to suggest our dinner on Kings Highway instead. But I typed, "Sure. What time?" because I thought compromise was love. That Friday, I left the shop early, showered until my skin stung, and put on my navy suit that still fit if I kept my shoulders relaxed. I wore my father's pocket watch, not because anyone would see it, but because holding it made me feel steady. The restaurant sat atop a boutique hotel downtown, all glass and dim lighting. The host said my name like he was tasting it. Maribel looked perfect. Cream blazer, hair smoothed back, small gold hoops. She kissed my cheek and whispered, "Just be yourself," like it was advice and not a warning. Cameron, Selah, and Noel were already seated near a fire feature, their coats draped in a way that suggested they never got cold. Their laughter rose and fell together, practiced. Selah shook my hand, but didn't squeeze. Noel smiled without showing teeth. Cameron asked, "So, Marcus, what's new at Restoration?" with the same tone someone uses for a hobby they do not understand. I answered politely and tried to keep my voice warm. In my head, I could hear my mother saying, "Keep your dignity, baby. Don't chase their approval." The conversation kept sliding away from me like soap. They discussed private equity, brand collaborations, a retreat in Sedona, and a members-only gym opening in Clayton. Maribel kept glancing at me, as if checking whether I was blending in. When I spoke, she sometimes touched my knee under the table, not affectionate, more like a cue to shorten my sentences. I watched her do it and felt an embarrassed heat rise in my neck. I told myself not to be sensitive. I told myself this was her world, and loving her meant learning the language. Halfway through dinner, the subject turned to houses. Noel mentioned a listing in Ladue with clean lines and breathing room. Cameron said Maribel deserved more space to evolve. Selah asked Maribel, "Do you ever feel like you're carrying dead weight?" Then she sipped her drink and looked at me like I was not sitting there. Maribel laughed, one sharp note, and said, "Sometimes I feel like I'm living two different lives." I tried to smile and asked, "What's wrong with the life we built?" The table got quiet in the way that tells you just stepped on someone's script. Maribel's eyes flashed, quick and controlled. "Nothing is wrong," she said too fast. Then Cameron leaned back and said, "It's okay to admit you've outgrown things." Selah nodded like a judge. Noel said, "Growth requires edits." I held my glass of water like it was an anchor. I wanted to ask Maribel why we were having this conversation in public. I wanted to say my work paid our mortgage and kept our lights on. But I heard my own voice in my head. Don't embarrass her. Don't create a scene. I swallowed my words like they were bitter medicine. After dinner, they wanted photos by the rooftop view. The women arranged themselves, coats open, chins angled. Maribel handed her phone to me. "Get the skyline," she said. I took the picture and tried to make them look good, because that is what you do when you care. Cameron glanced at the screen afterward and said, "Maribel, you look amazing, like you're finally stepping into yourself." Then she turned to me and added, "Good job, husband," the way someone praises a child for holding a door. In the elevator down, Maribel stared at her reflection in the mirrored wall and adjusted her blazer. I stood beside her and watched our two faces together, hers polished, mine trying. "You okay?" I asked. "I'm fine," she said. Then, after a beat, "Just don't take everything personally." That sentence stayed with me. It sat on my chest all weekend. Because what else was there to take personally, if not the way your wife's friends talked about you while your wife let it happen? Monday morning, the shop heater refused to start. I spent an hour in the cold, cursing under my breath, hands numb as I tightened a bolt. An older man named Mr. Bishop came in to pick up a restored rocking chair and saw my red knuckles. "Marriage okay?" he asked casually, like he was asking about the weather. I laughed because it was easier than answering. Mr. Bishop had been married 47 years and wore his ring like a promise, not an accessory. He said, "People can love you and still disrespect you. Don't confuse the two." Then he left, and I stood in the empty shop with that sentence echoing. Maribel started coming home later. Not scandalously late, just late enough that dinner cooled, and my questions felt annoying. "Client dinner," she'd say. "Strategy session. Networking." Her perfume changed, sharper, like citrus and something metallic. She replaced a framed photo of our wedding in the hallway with an abstract print she said was more modern. When I asked why, she said, "It's just decor, Marcus." But it did not feel like decor. It felt like erasing. One Wednesday, I cooked her favorite, salmon with lemon and dill, rice cooked the way she liked, fluffy, not sticky. I set the table, lit a candle, and put on one of our old records. She walked in, glanced at everything, and sighed as if I had done it wrong. "You didn't have to do all this," she said. "I wanted to." I replied. She kissed my forehead like I was a relative and said, "I'm exhausted." Then she ate 3 bites, checked her phone, and went upstairs. I sat alone and listened to the needle scratch at the end of the record, that repeating sound of something stuck. Decision point number 2 came in early March, when Maribel announced she'd been invited to a women's leadership brunch on Sunday morning, our pancake morning. She said it like it was non-negotiable. "It's important," she told me. I could have insisted. I could have said, "Our marriage is also important." I could have asked her to choose us for once. Instead, I nodded and said, "Okay." I told myself I was being supportive. The truth was I was afraid that if I pushed, she would show me how far away she already was. That Sunday, I went alone to New Hope Missionary Baptist, the church my parents raised me in, now across town from our house. The sanctuary smelled like old wood and choir robes. The organ hummed under my fingers while the choir practiced hymn that always made my mother cry. I played, but my mind kept wandering to Maribel in some bright restaurant, laughing with people who spoke about alignment. After service, Sister Janine hugged me and said, "How's your wife?" I hesitated too long before answering, and her eyes softened. "Come by the fish fry Friday," she said. "Bring her if you can." I promised I would try. I did try. Friday afternoon, I texted Maribel about the fish fry. Small things at church. "I'd like you there." She replied, "I have plans." That was it. No apology, no explanation. My hands shook as I set my phone down. It surprised me how something so small could feel like a door shutting. I went to the fish fry anyway, ate 2 pieces of catfish, listened to the older men argue about the Cardinals, and laughed at jokes I did not find funny. I told myself I was still connected to something solid, even if my home felt like a showroom. The next week, Maribel started talking about lifestyle, the way people talk about allergies. "My lifestyle needs more travel," she said while sorting through her closet. "My lifestyle needs fewer obligations. My lifestyle needs a partner who can keep up." She said these things while tossing sweaters I bought her into a donation bag without looking at them. When I asked what keep up meant, she said, "It's not an insult, Marcus. It's just reality." I wanted to ask whose reality. Mine felt like it was being overwritten. On a rainy Tuesday, my cousin Darnell came by the shop with 2 coffees from a corner store and a face full of worry. Darnell drove a city bus and had a way of seeing trouble early, like he could smell it. He watched me stand on an old tabletop in silence, then said, "You have that look." "What look?" I asked, not stopping. He said, "The look of a man trying to earn love that already made up its mind." I snapped, "You don't know that." He didn't argue. He just took a sip of coffee and said quietly, "I know you." The blow-up did not happen in one dramatic scene. It happened in drips. Maribel corrected my words in front of others. She was rolling her eyes when I talked about a client's story, in her sighing when I asked if she'd be home for dinner, her friends texting her during our conversations, and her answering them immediately. One night, I reached for her hand on the couch, and she let me hold it for 3 seconds before pulling away to adjust a pillow. That small rejection hit harder than any shout. In late April, Maribel hosted a spring refresh at our house. She said it would be just a few people. I came home from the shop and found the living room rearranged, furniture pushed back like a stage, and a diffuser pumping out lavender. Cameron, Selah, and Noelle were there, plus 2 women I had never met. Everyone wore light colors. They spoke softly, like the house belonged to a spa. Maribel met me at the door and whispered, "Please don't be weird." I asked, "What does weird mean?" She said, "Just Marcus." Be easy. I changed into a clean shirt, wiped my boots, and stepped into my own living room like I needed permission. The women smiled politely, but their eyes tracked me. One of the new women asked Maribel, "Is this the husband?" As if I were a feature. Maribel laughed and said, "Yes, this is Marcus." No last name, no pride, just a label. I poured myself water and stayed near the kitchen, listening. They discussed travel visions and elevated partnerships. Sayla said, "Sometimes you have to release what no longer matches your frequency." I felt my jaw tighten. Maribel clinked a spoon against a glass and announced she wanted to share something exciting. I expected a promotion, maybe a new project. Instead, she said, "I've been thinking a lot about what I want my life to look like in the next decade." The women leaned in. Maribel continued, "I want clarity. I want a home that feels like me. I want a partner who fits." I stared at her, waiting for her eyes to find mine, waiting for a signal that she understood I was standing right there. She looked past me, into her audience. Cameron smiled like she knew the ending. Noelle nodded, slow and satisfied. Sayla said softly, "Say it." And then my wife, Maribel, turned toward me with a calm face that did not match the cruelty of her words and said, "We have decided you don't suit my lifestyle." She pronounced lifestyle like it was one word with a capital L. For a second, my ears rang. I could hear the diffuser. I could hear someone's bracelet clink. I could hear my own breathing get too loud. I felt heat climb up my throat, that instinct to defend yourself, to list your contributions like receipts. I wanted to say, "I paid for this house. I refinished the table you're serving snacks on. I held you when your father died. I drove across town at midnight when your tire blew." But something in me went still. My father's pocket watch was in my pants pocket, heavy and grounding. I looked at Maribel, then at her friends, then back at her, and I smiled. Not happy, not joking, just controlled. Then I said, letting the word hang. Maribel's eyebrows lifted, expecting a fight. Cameron's lips curled, like she was ready to watch me lose. I stepped forward, picked up the small bowl of keys from the entryway table, and held it out to Maribel. "Then you can start tonight," I said. "You can suit your lifestyle somewhere else." The room froze. Maribel blinked like she didn't understand the script had changed. "Marcus," she said, warning in her voice. I kept my smile. "No, not in front of them. Not like this." Sayla stood first, palms raised. "Let's all stay calm," she said, like she was a mediator she imagined herself to be. Noelle murmured, "This is why we don't do mixed energies," which made my stomach turn. I looked at them and said, evenly, "You are guests in my home. Please leave." My voice surprised me, steady, almost polite. The women gathered their purses quickly, the way people do when they realize they are not in control. Cameron lingered, eyes sharp. "You're proving her point," she said. I met her stare. "And you're proving mine." When the door shut behind them, the silence was thick. Maribel's face shifted, the public calm cracking into private irritation. "You embarrass me," she said. I let out a small breath. "You tried to," I corrected. "You tried to embarrass me." She crossed her arms. I was being honest. I nodded. "So am I?" She stared at the keys still in my hand. "You're kicking me out?" she asked, as if the idea offended her more than what she had done. I said, "I'm asking you to respect me. Tonight, in this house." Maribel scoffed and walked into the kitchen, opening cabinets like she needed the noise. "You always do this," she said. "You get quiet and cold and act like you're morally superior." I followed slowly and set the keys down on the counter. "I am not superior," I said. "I am just not begging." She laughed, short and bitter. "Begging? Please. You don't even try to evolve." I answered, "I evolve every time I fix something broken instead of throwing it away." She snapped. "That's your problem. You like broken things." That sentence landed and stayed. I thought about my shop filled with damaged furniture. Yes, but also history, care, patience. I thought about Maribel, how I had loved her ambition, and tried to make space for it. Do you hear yourself? I asked, "You're talking about people who are like objects." She rolled her eyes. "Here we go." I leaned against the counter, tired. "Maribel, you do not get to form a committee about my worth." She flinched. "It wasn't a committee." I lifted my eyebrows. "You said we?" She stared at the floor, then said quieter, "They see what you refuse to see." I asked, "What do you think I refuse to see?" She sighed dramatically. "That you're holding me back." I let the word sit. "How?" I asked, "Name it." She opened her mouth, closed it, then said, "You don't network. You don't travel. You don't want more." I replied, "I want more honesty than you're giving me. I want more partnership than you're offering." She snapped, "Partnership means matching." I said, "No, partnership means choosing." That night, Maribel went upstairs and slept in the guest room. I did not chase her. I did not apologize for refusing humiliation. I lay in our bed and stared at the ceiling fan shadows until dawn. In the morning, I made coffee and listened to the house creak, as if it was waking reluctantly. When Maribel came down, she wore workout clothes and a tight expression. She grabbed her water bottle and said, "I'm going to Cameron's." I asked, "To talk?" She answered, "To breathe." I nodded, and she left without looking back. The next week became a careful dance around each other. Maribel started packing small bags, just in case. She moved her jewelry into a travel case. She began taking calls in the garage. When I asked who she was talking to, she said, "Work." I did not believe her, but I also did not want to become a man who checks phones. I kept showing up at my shop, kept sanding and staining, and kept restoring other people's heirlooms while my own life splintered. Every night, I wound my father's pocket watch and listened to its stubborn ticking. A month later, Maribel requested we meet to discuss logistics. She chose a bright cafe in Clayton with white tile and pastries named in French. I would have chosen our diner, but she was still choosing the stage. I arrived early, sat by the window, and watched the rain trail down the glass. Maribel walked in wearing a crisp trench coat and a face like a presentation. She sat, opened a notebook, and said, "We need to talk about the house." I said, "We need to talk about respect." She pressed her lips together. "That too." She spoke first about schedules, then about finances, then about separation. She said the word like it was a concept, not a wound. I listened, hands around my coffee cup. When she paused, I asked, "When did you start disliking me?" Her eyes widened slightly, annoyed by the directness. "I don't dislike you," she said. "I'm just misaligned." That word again. I said, "Maribel, you told me in front of people that I don't suit your lifestyle." That was not misalignment. That was contempt. She looked down, then said softly, "I didn't think you'd do anything." That confession hit harder than the insult. Not that she said it. She expected I would accept it. I asked, "So you tested me?" She shook her head. I needed a push. I laughed once, no humor. "You used humiliation as a tool." She bristled. "You're making me the villain." I replied, "You made yourself that when you invited an audience." Maribel's eyes flashed. "You've always been too comfortable," she said. I said, "Comfort is not a crime. Disrespect is." She stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time, and maybe she was. Over the next few months, she moved into a furnished apartment in a newer building in the central West End. She sent me emails instead of texts, as if distance made her words cleaner. She asked for the house, arguing it fit her brand better than it fit my craft business. I read that sentence 3 times, incredulous. My lawyer, a calm black woman named Patrice Whitaker, raised an eyebrow and said, "She thinks a marriage is a marketing plan." Patrice did not insult Maribel. She just named the pattern. "We'll keep this factual," Patrice said, "and you will keep your dignity. That's your job." Maribel's friend became louder in the background. Cameron posted photos with Maribel at rooftop events, captions about choosing yourself. Selah hosted a healing circle that looked suspiciously like gossip in expensive clothes. Noel posted a quote about outgrowing people who can't keep up. I stopped looking. It was poison. Instead, I threw myself into my shop. I started a Saturday workshop for teenagers, mostly black kids from North County, teaching them how to sand without rushing, how to listen to wood grain, and how patience shows up in the hands. It became the only place I felt fully seen. One evening, a boy named Jalen asked me, "Mr. Marcus, why are you so calm?" I almost corrected his grammar out of habit, then stopped. He wasn't being disrespectful. He was curious. I said, "Because anger makes you sloppy." Jalen nodded like that made sense. Later, I realized I was teaching him what I was trying to learn myself. That calm can be a choice, not a weakness. When I told my cousin Darnell about the workshops, he smiled. "That's your evolution," he said. "Not theirs." I held on to that. Maribel and I tried one counseling session, at Patrice's suggestion, more for closure than reconciliation. The therapist's office smelled like chamomile. Maribel sat with her legs crossed tight, hands folded like she was waiting to be graded. When the therapist asked why she wanted to be there, Maribel said, "I want us to be respectful." I asked, "Why did you say we decided?" Maribel's jaw clenched. "Because I didn't want to be the only one responsible." That honesty was almost admirable. Almost. The therapist nodded slowly and said, "So you outsourced accountability." Maribel stared at her lap. Leaving that session, Maribel followed me to the parking lot and said, "Marcus, I didn't mean to hurt you like that." I stopped by my truck and looked at her. "You didn't mean to," I said. "You just didn't mean to lose control." Her eyes filled, but she blinked it back. "You're not the man I pictured," she whispered. I replied, "I am the man you married." She shook her head. "I thought you'd fight harder." I said, "I fought for years. I'm just not fighting in public to entertain your friends." Then I got in my truck and drove away. The legal process moved slowly, like winter thawing. Appraisals, documents, hearings. Meanwhile, Maribel's lifestyle looked shiny from a distance and lonely up close. I knew because I still cared enough to notice. She stopped posting as much. Cameron's photos began featuring new people. Selah's comments grew less frequent. Noelle's captions became vague, like she was trying to convince herself. One day, Maribel emailed me asking if I could help with a dresser she had inherited from her grandmother, one of the first pieces I ever restored for her. She wrote, "It's coming apart. I don't know who to call." I sat at my shop desk, staring at that email. Here was another decision point. I could ignore her. I could let her feel what it meant to discard someone who builds. Or I could help because I am the kind of man who fixes what can be fixed, even when it hurts. I called Patrice. She said, "Helping is not wrong. Just don't confuse helping with returning." That sentence settled into my bones. I replied, "Maribel, bring it to the shop Tuesday at 10. I'll look. This does not change anything else." She responded with a single thank you. No emoji, no softness, just plain words. Tuesday, Maribel arrived in sunglasses despite the cloudy day. She carried the dresser like it was fragile and precious, which it was. The wood was cracked along the joints, drawers sagging. She stood in my shop doorway and looked around like she had forgotten what my world smelled like. "It's cold in here," she said. "The heater's old," I replied, and then, after a beat, "So am I?" Her mouth twitched like she might smile, but she didn't. She set the dresser down carefully and asked quietly, "Do you ever miss me?" I answered honestly, "I miss who we were before you needed witnesses." Maribel's eyes narrowed, not angry, injured. "I didn't need witnesses," she said. "I needed courage." I picked up a clamp and checked the joint. Courage would have been telling me privately. I said, "Courage would have been owning your choice without hiding behind we." Maribel swallowed, and her voice got smaller. "They were trying to help." I looked up at her. "Help you do what?" She didn't answer. The shop was quiet except for the hum of the overhead light. I said, gentler, "Maribel, your friends don't have to live with the consequences." "You do." I fixed the dresser over the next 2 weeks, replacing dowels, re-gluing joints, sanding and sealing until it held together again. When Maribel returned to pick it up, she ran her fingertips over the smooth edge and whispered, "You always make things look new." I said, "No, I make them strong." She looked at me then, really looked. "I'm sorry," she said. Her apology sounded unfamiliar, like a word she had practiced but never used in a sentence. I nodded once. "I believe you're sorry," I said. "I don't believe you're safe for me." Her eyes watered. "That's cruel," she whispered. I replied, "Cruel is what you did on purpose." The divorce finalized in late November, when the air turned sharp and the sky stayed gray longer than it should. We sat in a small courtroom in downtown St. Louis, fluorescent lights buzzing. Maribel wore a charcoal suit and looked like she was going to a job interview. I wore the same navy suit from the rooftop dinner because I wanted to prove something to myself. I did not need a new costume to face an ending. The judge spoke in a neutral voice about property and agreements. Maribel's hand shook when she signed. I signed steadily, pocket watch in my pocket, ticking like a heartbeat. After court, Maribel caught up to me in the hallway. Her voice was careful. "Are you going to hate me?" she asked. I stopped and faced her. "No," I said. "Hate would mean I'm still tied to you." She flinched, then nodded like she understood. "Cameron said you'd try to ruin me," she admitted. I almost laughed. "Cameron doesn't know me," I said. Maribel's eyes dropped. "She doesn't answer my calls much anymore," she said, as if confessing that betrayal surprised her. I replied, "That's what happens when people love the story more than the person." Winter came hard. The house felt emptier without Maribel's movements, but it also felt quieter in a way that let my lungs expand. I kept the workshop for the teens going, adding a small scholarship funded by selling restored pieces online. I started going to barbershop on Saturdays again, sitting in the familiar rhythm of clippers and conversation. Old men argued about sports. Kids played on their phones. Someone always complained about the weather. One Saturday, my barber, Mr. Leon, said, "You look lighter." I told him, "I'm not carrying committee anymore." He grinned. "Good." In early spring, I ran into Maribel at a community fundraiser for a youth arts program. I was there because one of my workshop kids had a painting in the show. Maribel was there because her company sponsored the event. She stood near a display, holding a drink, scanning the room like she was looking for an exit and an audience at the same time. When our eyes met, she approached slowly. "Hi," she said. "Hi," I replied. She looked at the teens laughing nearby and asked, "Those are your students?" I nodded. "They're learning," I said. She swallowed. "You built something," she said, admiration and regret tangled together. I answered, "I finally had room." Maribel hesitated, then said, "I told myself I needed a different lifestyle, but I think I need different friends." I studied her face for a moment. She looked older, not in years, but in understanding. "Maybe," I said, "or maybe you needed to learn how to stand alone, without turning love into a performance." She exhaled, shaky. "Do you think I can change?" she asked. I answered honestly again. "Yes," I said, "but changing is not the same as undoing." Her eyes filled, and she nodded as if she had expected that answer. A few weeks later, I found an envelope in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was my father's pocket watch chain, something I thought I had lost during the divorce chaos. Along with it was a note in Maribel's neat handwriting. "I am returning what helped you stay steady. Thank you for not becoming cruel. I am trying to learn how to be accountable without an audience. Maribel." I sat on my porch steps and read it twice. I did not feel triumph. I felt something quieter, relief that she finally named the truth. I clipped the chain back onto the watch and listened to it tick. That summer, I took my workshop kids on a field trip to Missouri History Museum, and one of them asked why old things matter. I told him, because people leave pieces of themselves behind, and we learn by handling what they made. Later, driving home with the windows down, I thought about Maribel's sentence, "We have decided," and how close I came to shrinking under it. I thought about the moment I smiled and refused. It wasn't revenge. It was self-respect. And I understood something I wish I had learned earlier. Love that requires you to be smaller is not love. It's control dressed up as taste. Months after the divorce, Maribel's life did not explode, and mine did not turn perfect. That is not how consequences work. Hers came quietly. The friends who applauded her cruelty did not stay for her loneliness, and the lifestyle she chased did not hold her at night. Mine came quietly, too. I had to face how often I chose peace over truth until peace became silence. The turning point wasn't the courtroom. It was a living room when she said we decided, and I decided not to negotiate my dignity in front of spectators. If you take anything from this, let it be simple. Address disrespect the first time it shows up, and never let outsiders become co-authors of your marriage. Now that you've seen how it ended, I want one honest answer. What was the biggest red flag? Her friends, the lifestyle language, or the public humiliation? Put it in the comments, because your answer might help someone else recognize it sooner. If this story gives you something to think about, like it, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe for more original first-person relationship dramas with real consequences. The end.